The first time she reported me, I laughed it off as a joke. The second time, it cost me a $500 fine. The third time, she rewrote the neighborhood laws just to target me. She thought she'd won, that she'd driven my livelihood out of sight. What she didn't know was that I was about to park my work van, my tools, and 3 of my contractor buddies in the one place she'd have to look at every single day, her own front yard. She wanted a war over my van, so I bought the house next door and turned it into her personal nightmare. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. My name is Eric Dawson, and I'm an electrician. It's a good trade, an honest one. It's put food on my table, paid for my house in the quiet, manicured subdivision of Willow Creek, and allowed me to build a life I was proud of. The centerpiece of my business, the mobile command center for everything I do, is my van. It's a white Ford Transit, not new, but meticulously maintained. On the side, in clean blue lettering, it says, Dawson Electric, quality you can trust. It's my billboard, my toolbox, and my office, all rolled into one. For the first 2 years I lived in Willow Creek, I parked it in my driveway, right next to my personal car. It was a symbol of the hard work that afforded me a home in a neighborhood like this. I never thought it could be a problem. Then, Karen Silva moved in next door. Willow Creek was the kind of place where lawns were cut with geometric precision, and the color of your mailbox was a topic of serious discussion. It was a bit sterile for my taste, but it was safe, quiet, and the houses were solid. My house was a modest 2-story colonial, my pride and joy. The house next to mine had been empty for a few months before Karen bought it. I watched the moving trucks arrive with a neighborly curiosity. I saw a woman in her early 60s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair and a gaze that seemed to be constantly scanning for imperfections, directing the movers with sharp, imperious gestures. I gave a friendly wave. She gave me a look that could curdle milk before turning back to her boxes. I shrugged it off. Some people just aren't the waving type. The first sign of trouble was a note, tucked under my windshield wiper a week later. It was written on expensive cream-colored stationery in a spiky, aggressive script. The presence of commercial vehicles in residential driveways is an eyesore and negatively impacts the aesthetic harmony and property values of our community. Please find alternative parking arrangements. It wasn't signed. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that it was from her. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. This was my house, my driveway. I paid my mortgage and my taxes. I wasn't parking on the street or blocking anyone. I was a homeowner, just like her. A few days later, I was in my front yard pulling a few weeds when she emerged from her house. She was dressed in a crisp linen pantsuit, looking like she was about to chair a corporate board meeting, not water her petunias. "Excuse me," she said, her voice as sharp as the crease in her pants. "You must be Mr. Dawson." "Just Eric is fine," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on my jeans. "And you are?" "I am Karen Silva," she announced, as if I should have known. "I believe you received my note regarding your vehicle." She gestured toward my van with a flick of her wrist, as if it were a piece of garbage someone had carelessly discarded. "The anonymous one?" "Yeah, I got it," I said, my friendly demeanor starting to fray. "Look, Mrs. Silvar, it's Ms. Silva," she corrected. "Ms. Silva," I amended, forcing a patient tone. "It's my work van. I'm an electrician. It's how I make a living. I park it here every night, and I've never had a complaint in 2 years." "Then consider me your first," she sniffed. "It's a commercial blight. This is a residential neighborhood, not an industrial park. The lettering, the size, it's simply not appropriate. It lowers the tone." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. It lowers the tone? It's a van. It's clean. It's not leaking oil. It's not making noise. It's just parked. It's an advertisement, she shot back. And it's an ugly one. I have guests over, and the first thing they see is that monstrosity. It's embarrassing. I've already spoken to the homeowners association. My stomach tightened. The HOA. The shadowy council of neighborhood busybodies who had the power to fine you if your grass was a quarter-inch too long. And what did they say? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. They said they would look into it, she said with a smug little smile. I'm confident they'll see things my way. We have standards to maintain in Willow Creek. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back into her pristine home, leaving me standing in my yard, fuming. For the next few weeks, an uneasy quiet settled. I kept parking my van in the driveway, a small act of defiance. I'd see her peeking through her blinds, her face a mask of disapproval. Then the first official letter came. It was from the Willow Creek HOA, a crisp white envelope that felt heavy with doom. It was a warning, citing a vague covenant about maintaining the residential character of the neighborhood. It mentioned an anonymous complaint, but I knew who was behind it. The letter informed me that if the commercial vehicle was not removed from public view, fines would be levied. I called the HOA president, a retired accountant named Bob, who sounded perpetually tired. Bob, it's Eric Dawson on Maple Lane. I got this letter about my van. Ah, yes, he sighed. Ms. Silva has been very persistent. Persistent? Bob, it's my work vehicle. I'm self-employed. Where am I supposed to put it? I can't exactly fit it in the garage with my wife's car and my workbench. My garage was a standard 2-car, but between my wife's SUV and my extensive collection of tools, shelves, and equipment, there was no way the high-roof Transit would fit. I understand, Eric, I really do, Bob said, his voice dripping with practiced, insincere sympathy. But the covenants are the covenants. And Ms. Silva is making a very strong case about property values. Property values? My van is going to tank the entire neighborhood's real estate market? The absurdity was staggering. Look, just try to be discreet, Bob suggested. Maybe park it on the street for a while? Parking it on the street was actually against a different HOA rule, one that prohibited overnight street parking to keep the roads clear for street sweepers and emergency vehicles. I pointed this out to Bob. He sighed again, a long, weary sound. Well, you'll have to figure something out, Eric. A second complaint will trigger a fine. $500. The second complaint came a week later. I found the violation notice stuck to my front door, a bright orange sticker that felt like a slap in the face. $500. I paid it, grinding my teeth. That was $500 of my family's money, gone because my new neighbor didn't like the look of my van. My anger began to simmer, a low, constant heat in the back of my mind. This wasn't about a van anymore. It was about a bully using a rulebook to push me around. I started parking a few blocks away, on a public road outside the subdivision's jurisdiction. It was a massive inconvenience. Every morning, I'd have to walk 10 minutes to get my van, and every evening, I'd have to walk 10 minutes back home, often in the dark, carrying tools or materials. It added nearly half an hour to my already long days. It was frustrating, and it was humiliating. I felt like a guest in my own neighborhood, forced to hide a key part of my life. But for Karen Silva, it wasn't enough. My van was out of her sight, but the knowledge of its existence seemed to gnaw at her. She wanted a permanent solution. She wanted to make sure no one else would ever dare to park a work vehicle in Willow Creek again. She started a petition. She went door to door, armed with a clipboard and a saccharine smile, talking about preserving our investment and protecting the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. She painted a picture of a slippery slope where my one van would lead to a fleet of dump trucks and cement mixers lining the streets. Some people signed just to get her off their porch. Others, the ones who ironed their curtains and measured their lawn height, eagerly agreed with her. She called a special HOA meeting to propose a new amendment to the bylaws, one that would explicitly ban any vehicle with commercial lettering, logos, or visible equipment from being parked anywhere on a homeowner's property, unless it was fully enclosed in a garage. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs. The air was thick with cheap coffee and self-importance. I went, determined to defend myself. I saw Karen sitting in the front row looking smug, her packet of supporting documents laid out neatly before her. I saw Bob at the head table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I saw a handful of neighbors who gave me sympathetic looks but seemed unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. Karen stood up and gave her presentation. She spoke of brand dilution for the neighborhood, of visual pollution, and the creeping commercialization of their residential sanctuary. She showed pictures of my van, blown up on a projector screen, as if it were evidence in a murder trial. "This is what we are fighting against," she said, her voice ringing with passion. "If we allow this, what's next? Tow trucks? Landscaping trailers? Where does it end? We must draw a line in the sand to protect the very essence of Willow Creek." When it was my turn to speak, I felt a tremor of anger in my hands. I stood up and faced the room. "My name is Eric Dawson," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's my van she's put up on the screen. It's not a symbol of creeping commercialization. It's a symbol of hard work. It's the reason I can afford to live in this neighborhood. The reason I can pay my HOA dues, the same dues that pay for this clubhouse and Bob's salary." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "I'm a small business owner. I'm your neighbor. If my furnace goes out in the middle of the night or your power shorts out during a storm, you'd be happy to see a van like mine pull up. But you don't want to see it during the day? You want the service, but you don't want the person who provides it to be your equal, to live next to you? This isn't about property values. It's about snobbery. It's about looking down on people who work with their hands." I could see my words hitting home with a few people. A man in the back, a plumber I'd met once, nodded in agreement. But then Karen's allies started to speak up, echoing her talking points about aesthetics and rules. The debate went back and forth, but I could feel the tide turning against me. The fear of falling property values, however irrational, was a powerful motivator. When the vote was called, the amendment passed by a margin of 2-1. I walked out of that clubhouse feeling utterly defeated. It was official. My van was outlawed in my own neighborhood. The walk home from my new, distant parking spot that night was the longest of my life. The injustice of it all churned in my stomach. I had followed the rules. I had built a life. And now I was being punished for it, all because of one miserable, power-tripping woman. I sat on my porch, staring at her perfectly dark, silent house, and I felt a cold, hard knot of resentment solidify in my chest. She had won this battle, but I was damned if I was going to let her win the war. The next few weeks were miserable. The logistical nightmare of my remote van parking was taking a toll. I was late to a couple of jobs because of the extra travel time. I had to haul heavy spools of wire and toolboxes from my van to my house for overnight storage, breaking my back in the process. My business, my efficiency, was suffering. I looked into renting a spot and a commercial storage facility, but the costs were prohibitive, easily adding up to several $1,000s a year, and the closest one was a 20-minute drive away. It felt like I was being taxed for the privilege of working. My wife, Sarah, saw the stress I was under. "There has to be another way, Eric," she said one evening, rubbing my shoulders as I hunched over my laptop, fruitlessly searching for solutions. "This is insane. We can't let that woman dictate our lives." "I know," I grumbled, But what can I do? She used the system against me. She weaponized the HOA. Short of selling the house and moving, I'm stuck. The thought of moving was infuriating. We loved our house. We had put so much work into it. Why should we be the ones to leave? Why should she get to win so completely? I closed the laptop, my frustration boiling over. I needed some air. I walked outside and stood on my driveway, staring at the empty space where my van should have been. My gaze drifted next door, to Karen's house, and then to the house on the other side of hers. It was a mirror image of my own, a 2-story colonial with a 2-car garage. A for sale sign was hammered into the lawn. I had noticed it a few days ago, but hadn't paid it much mind. Old Mr. Henderson had passed away a few months back, and his kids were finally selling the place. I stood there, staring at the sign, and a thought, a wild, audacious, and utterly insane thought, began to form in my mind. It started as a flicker, a spark of mad genius, and then it erupted into a full-blown bonfire. The house had a 2-car garage, a garage that was currently empty. A garage that was, according to the new HOA rule, the only acceptable place to park a commercial vehicle. A garage that was situated directly beside Karen Silva's property line. I started to laugh. It was a low chuckle at first. Then it grew into a loud, unhinged bark of laughter that echoed in the quiet suburban night. Sarah came to the door, a worried look on her face. "Eric, are you okay?" I turned to her, a grin spreading across my face. The first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. "I'm better than okay," I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind, each detail falling perfectly into place. "I think I just found a new place to park my van." "What are you talking about?" she asked, confused. I pointed at the for sale sign. "I'm talking about that. I'm going to buy it." Sarah stared at me as if I had grown a second head. "Buy it? Eric, we can't afford a second house. Are you crazy? We'd be leveraged to the hilt." "Hear me out," I said, my mind racing, the pieces clicking together like a well-wired circuit. What do I need most right now? Storage. A place for the van, a place for my tools, my supplies, a workshop. That house has a 2-car garage and a full basement. That's more space than any commercial unit I could ever afford to rent. And it's right here. No more 10-minute walks, no more hauling equipment back and forth. But the house itself? The mortgage? The taxes? It would be a financial nightmare, she argued, though I could see a flicker of interest in her eyes. She hated what Karen was doing to me as much as I did. "That's the beautiful part," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "We don't have to live in it. We use the garage and the basement for the business. And the upstairs? The bedrooms? The living area? We rent them out. And who do we rent them to?" I paused for dramatic effect. "To other contractors, plumbers, carpenters, painters. Guys like me who are getting hassled by their own HOAs, who need a place to park their trucks and store their gear. We could turn it into a co-op, a haven for the trades. We'd cover the mortgage with the rent, and I'd get my workshop. And the best part, the absolute cherry on top?" Sarah's eyes widened as she understood. "Karen," she whispered. "Karen," I confirmed, my grin turning predatory. She was so worried about seeing one work van in my driveway. How is she going to feel when she has to look at 3, 4, maybe 5 of them, parked legally on the property right next to her? She wanted to draw a line in the sand. Fine, I'm going to buy the beach. The idea was certifiably insane. It was a monumental financial risk. But it was also perfect. It was a brilliant, elegant, and deeply satisfying solution to my problem. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, though the thought of Karen's face made me giddy. It was about taking back control. It was about turning her own weapon, her obsession with property and rules, against her. The next day, I was on the phone with the real estate agent. The house was listed for $450,000. It was a fair price for the neighborhood, but it was still a terrifying number. I spent the next week in a frenzy of financial calculations. I went to the bank. I spoke to my accountant. We had a decent amount of equity in our current house, and my business was profitable. We could just about swing the down payment, and the mortgage would be manageable if, and it was a big if, I could find tenants. I put out some feelers. I talked to guys I knew from the supply house. I mentioned my idea to Dave, a plumber I was working with on a kitchen remodel. His eyes lit up. "Are you serious, man?" he said. "My HOA is a nightmare. They fine me if my truck has a speck of mud on it. I've been renting a spot miles away. If you had a room and a parking spot for me, I'd take it in a heartbeat." That was all the encouragement I needed. We put in an offer. It was a tense few days, but the Henderson kids were motivated sellers, and our offer was clean. They accepted. We were officially under contract to buy the house next to Karen Silva. The 30-day closing period was one of the most stressful of my life. Every time I saw Karen, my heart hammered in my chest. I was terrified she would somehow find out and try to sabotage the sale. I imagined her calling the bank, the real estate agent, the HOA, trying to find some rule or loophole to stop me. But she remained blissfully ignorant, occasionally giving me a smug little smirk when she saw me walking down the street in the evening, a silent reminder of her victory. Little did she know, her victory was about to become my masterpiece. The day of the closing, I could barely sign my name. My hand was shaking so much. But when the keys were placed in my palm, a wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over me. I owned it. I owned the garage. I owned the driveway. I owned the solution to my problem and the instrument of my revenge. I didn't waste any time. That very afternoon, I drove my van from its exile on the public street, down Maple Lane, past my own house, past Karen's house, and turned it right into the driveway of my new property. I hit the garage door opener, a brand new one I'd installed myself the day before. The door rumbled open, revealing the clean, empty space within. I pulled the van inside, the nose of it just feet from the wall that separated my new garage from Karen's perfectly manicured garden. I shut off the engine, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I had done it. My van was home. I got out and stood in the driveway for a moment, just breathing it in. As if on cue, Karen's front door opened. She stepped out onto her porch to get her mail. She saw me standing there. She frowned, a flicker of confusion on her face. Then her eyes darted to the open garage, to the back of my white van, clearly visible inside. Her brain seemed to short-circuit. She looked at me, then at the van, then at the house. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a sold banner. Her jaw literally dropped. Her perfectly made-up face went slack with disbelief, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The connection was made. I could see the gears turning, the horrifying realization crashing down on her. I gave her a little wave, the friendliest, most cheerful wave I could muster. "Afternoon, neighbor," I called out. "Looks like we'll be seeing a lot more of each other." She didn't respond. She just stood there, frozen on her porch, the mail slipping from her grasp and scattering at her feet. The look on her face was worth every penny of the down payment, every sleepless night, every ounce of stress. It was the beautiful, exquisite look of a petty tyrant who has just realized her carefully constructed world has come crashing down around her. And the best part was, the fun was just getting started. The first week was a quiet study in psychological warfare. I made a point of using my new garage with theatrical flair. I'd open the door with a flourish in the morning, letting it stay open for a good 10 minutes while I organized my tools. I'd back the van out slowly, giving Karen, who was invariably watching from her kitchen window, a full view of the Dawson Electric logo. In the evenings, I'd do the same, sometimes leaving the interior lights on in the van so it glowed like a beacon inside the garage, a monument to her failure. Her reaction was to pretend it wasn't happening. She'd avert her eyes, her posture stiff with indignation. She stopped getting her mail if I was outside. She would scurry from her car to her front door like a frightened mouse. But I could feel her watching. The sheer, vibrating anger coming from that house was palpable. Phase 2 of the plan went into effect the following weekend. Dave the plumber was my first tenant. He was a great guy in his late 30s, just trying to grow his own business, and he was overjoyed at the arrangement. He pulled up on a Saturday morning in his Ford F-150, a sturdy work truck with precision plumbing neatly lettered on the side. It wasn't as big as my van, but it was unmistakably a commercial vehicle. I had cleared out the other half of the garage for him. As he backed his truck in, I saw Karen's curtains twitch violently. A few minutes later, she stormed out of her house and marched right up to the property line, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. She was pointing at Dave's truck, now sitting comfortably next to my van in the garage. "The meaning of what, Ms. Silva?" I asked, all innocence. "My new tenant is just moving in." "Tenant? You have a tenant?" she sputtered. "And he drives that?" "He does," I said cheerfully. "He's a plumber, very handy to have around. This is Dave." Dave gave a little wave. "Ma'am." Karen ignored him completely, her laser-like glare fixed on me. "You can't do this. This is a residential property. You can't run a business from here." I'm not running a business from here," I said calmly, enjoying this far more than I probably should have. "I'm using my garage to store my vehicle, which is perfectly legal according to the new rule you worked so hard to pass. And Dave here is renting a room. He's a resident. He's allowed to park his vehicle in the garage, too. I checked the bylaws very thoroughly." Her face went from red to a sort of pale, blotchy purple. She was speechless. She had been so focused on vehicles being parked in driveways, in public view, that she hadn't considered this loophole. Her own amendment was my shield. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, making a sound like a deflating balloon. She spun around and stomped back to her house, slamming the door so hard I thought the glass might break. Dave looked at me and grinned. "I think she's a little upset." "Just a little," I said, clapping him on the back. "Welcome to the neighborhood." 2 weeks later, my second tenant arrived. This was Marco, a painter in his 40s whose van was even more colorful than mine, splattered with a Jackson Pollock-esque collection of paint drips and sporting a logo that read, "Marco's Masterpieces." Since the garage was now full, Marco's van had to be parked in the driveway. My driveway. On my private property. This, for Karen, was a bridge too far. The sight of a second, even more conspicuous work vehicle parked in plain sight, right next to her prize-winning rose bushes, sent her into a complete meltdown. The first I knew of it was when my phone rang. It was Bob, the beleaguered HOA president. "Eric," he said, and the exhaustion in his voice was a tangible thing. "I've just had Ms. Silva on the phone for the last 45 minutes. She was screaming, mostly. Something about a painter's van?" Yes. That would be my new tenant, Marco," I said. "He's renting my second upstairs bedroom. Eric, she's saying you're running a commercial boarding house. She's demanding an emergency meeting. She's threatening lawsuits. Against you, against me, against the entire HOA. Bob, let me be very clear," I said, my voice firm. "I bought a house. I am renting out rooms in my house to tenants. Those tenants happen to be tradesmen. They are parking their personal work vehicles on my private property, not on the street. I have not broken a single rule. In fact, I am following the rules that Ms. Silva herself created. If she has a problem with that, it's her problem, not mine. Not mine, she says. The new van is in the driveway, not in the garage. Bob countered, his voice rising in panic. The rule she wrote says vehicles can't be parked on property unless fully enclosed in a garage. It doesn't say they must be in the garage. It was written to give an option, an exception to the ban. It doesn't mandate garage parking for all vehicles. Again, I read the bylaws very, very carefully. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, she can do about this. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Bob breathing heavily. She's going to have my head, he muttered. Maybe you should have thought about that before you let a bully rewrite the rules to target one of her neighbors, I said, my patience wearing thin. You all created this monster. Now you have to deal with her. The war escalated. Karen started documenting everything. I'd see her with a telephoto lens, taking pictures of us coming and going. She'd stand at her window with a notepad, logging our hours. She called the city zoning department, claiming I was running an illegal business. An inspector came out, a tired-looking man named Frank. I invited him in, gave him a coffee, and walked him through the house. So, you're the one, he said, looking around the tidy living room. Karen Silva has called my office 17 times in the last 3 days. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. She claims this is a commercial depot. This is a house, I explained patiently. I own it. I rent the 2 upstairs bedrooms to 2 gentlemen. They live here. They sleep here. They eat here. Downstairs, in the basement, I have my personal workshop. And in the garage, we park our vehicles. Everything is zoned residential. We're not conducting any sales here. We're not meeting clients here. We're just a living. Frank nodded, taking a few notes. He looked in the garage, saw the 2 vehicles. He saw Marco's van in the driveway. He walked the property. Well, Mr. Dawson, he said finally, as far as I can tell, you're not in violation of any city zoning ordinances. It's an unusual living arrangement, but it's not illegal. I'll be filing a report to that effect. 1. He shook his head as he walked to his car. Good luck, he said, with a tone that suggested I would need it. Karen's defeat at the hands of the zoning board only made her more determined. If she couldn't get me on a technicality, she would resort to harassment. She started playing loud classical music, opera mostly, at 7 in the morning. The speakers pointed directly at the new house. She would turn on her sprinkler system at odd hours, accidentally soaking anyone who tried to walk up the driveway. Dave and Marco thought it was hilarious. They started referring to her as the Queen of Sheba. They'd wave cheerfully at her security cameras. Marco, in a stroke of genius, started a new painting project on the side of his van that faced her house. It was a mural, a beautiful landscape of a serene, peaceful valley with a little cottage. It was the most non-offensive, aesthetically pleasing image you could imagine. And it drove her absolutely insane. A constant, beautiful reminder of the vehicle she so despised. The final straw for me was when she called the police and filed a noise complaint because Dave was using a wrench in the garage at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. 2 officers showed up, looking deeply unimpressed. I explained the situation. They had a quiet word with Karen and left, rolling their eyes as they drove away. That's when I decided to add a 3rd tenant. I had an extra room in the basement that I had been using for storage. I cleared it out, put in a proper egress window, and put the word out. I found a young guy named Kevin, a landscaper just starting his business. His vehicle was a big pickup truck, and he often had a small trailer for his mowers. When Kevin moved in, parking his gleaming black truck and trailer in the now extended driveway, Karen didn't even come out to yell. There was just a strange, ominous silence from her house for 2 full days. Then, the notices went up. Another emergency HOA meeting. The agenda item was simple. Proposed amendment, a redefinition of residential property use. This was it. Her final, desperate gambit. She was going to try to change the very definition of what it meant to live in a house in Willow Creek. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Word had gotten around. This was the showdown everyone had been waiting for. Karen was there, of course, looking pale and grim, flanked by her 2 or 3 remaining allies. I was there, with Sarah by my side. And this time, I wasn't alone. Dave was there, and Marco, and Kevin. And behind us sat the plumber from the first meeting, and a few other tradesmen who lived in the neighborhood and had heard what was going on. They had seen Karen's crusade for what it was, an attack on all of them. Karen stood up, her hands shaking slightly. She launched into a tirade, her voice cracking with emotion. She spoke of a Trojan horse, of a commercial infestation masquerading as a residence. She claimed our house was a flop house for laborers and that we were single-handedly destroying the fabric of the community. "He has exploited a loophole," she seethed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He has made a mockery of our rules, a mockery of our way of life. We need a new rule, one that states that no more than 1 commercial vehicle can be associated with any single residential property, regardless of ownership or tenancy. We need to specify that a residence must be used primarily for traditional family living, not as a dormitory for workmen." When she finished, there was a tense silence. Bob, looking like he was about to have a nervous breakdown, opened the floor for discussion. I stood up. I'd like to say a few words. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. Ms. Silva is right about one thing. I did exploit a loophole. Her loophole. I'm a business owner. My business is wiring houses, fixing electrical problems. It's a good, honest business. Dave is a plumber. Marco is a painter. Kevin is a landscaper. He's the one who makes your lawns look so perfect. We are the people who build and maintain the aesthetic harmony that Ms. Silva is so concerned about. We are not an infestation. We are your neighbors. We work hard. We pay our taxes, and we pay our HOA dues. The only thing we're guilty of is owning the tools of our trade. This new rule she's proposing isn't about protecting property values. It's about discrimination. It's about deciding who is and who is not worthy of living in Willow Creek. Is that the kind of community we want to be? One where we push out the very people who keep it running? Then Dave stood up. "I'm one of the laborers she's talking about. I have a wife and 2 kids. I'm trying to save up to buy a house of my own. Maybe even in this neighborhood one day. Renting a room from Eric has been a godsend. It's affordable, it's safe, and I don't have to worry about getting fined because my truck has a ladder rack. If you pass this rule, you're telling people like me that we're not welcome here." Then the plumber from the back of the room spoke. "I've lived here for 15 years. I've seen this kind of thing before. It starts with a work van, then it's a basketball hoop, then it's the color you paint your door. You give people like Ms. Silva an inch, and they'll take a mile. Eric is standing up to a bully. I stand with him." One by one, a few other people spoke up. People who had remained silent before. They were tired of the petty rules, tired of the constant threat of fines, tired of the toxic atmosphere Karen had created. The tide of the room, which had once been so firmly with her, was now turning against her in a powerful wave. Karen watched, her face a mask of disbelief, as her support evaporated. The foundation of her power, the silent assent of her neighbors, was crumbling before her eyes. When the vote was called for her new amendment, it was defeated in a landslide. Only 2 hands went up in its favor. A smattering of applause broke out. Karen Silva stood up, her face white with fury and humiliation. She gathered her papers, her hands fumbling, and without a word, she fled the room. I walked home that night feeling 10 feet tall. It was over. We had won. We had not just beaten her, we had changed the conversation in the neighborhood. We had stood up for ourselves and, in doing so, had given others the courage to do the same. The next morning, I looked out my window. Next door, at Karen's house, a moving truck was parked in the driveway. She was leaving. She couldn't stand to live in the neighborhood she had failed to control, couldn't bear to look out her window every day at the house that represented her ultimate defeat. The house that was now home to an electrician, a plumber, a painter, and a landscaper. The house that had more work vans than any other on the block. The house that I had bought, all because she complained about my van. I took a sip of my coffee and smiled. It was a beautiful morning in the neighborhood.